The smallest act of kindness can change the fate of the most powerful man alive. Naomi Brooks tightened her grip on the steering wheel as rain streaked across her windshield in restless silver lines, turning the empty Georgia highway into a ribbon of blurred lights and wavering shadows. The dashboard clock glowed 11:42 p.m., nearly an hour after her shift had ended, and exhaustion settled into her shoulders like wet concrete. She had spent 10 straight hours cleaning a mansion that never seemed to gather enough dust to justify how invisible it made the people who worked there. Tomorrow would come too quickly, bringing another sunrise, another uniform, another paycheck that barely covered rent and her mother's medication. She wanted nothing more than to reach home, heat up the leftover chicken soup waiting in her refrigerator, and fall asleep on the worn couch she insisted was still comfortable. Then her headlights caught movement. A man stood alone near the edge of the road, soaked from head to toe beneath the relentless rain. He wasn't waving his arms or shouting for help. He simply stood there, one hand resting against a weathered wooden fence as though every ounce of strength had been spent just remaining upright. Naomi instinctively eased her foot off the gas. Common sense told her to keep driving. Every safety lecture she'd ever heard echoed inside her mind. Never stop alone at night. Never trust strangers. Lock the doors and call someone else. But there was something unsettling about the quietness of the man. He didn't look threatening. He looked lost. Really lost. She drove another 50 yards before guilt wrapped around her heart tighter than fear. With a slow breath, she checked her mirrors, made a careful U-turn, and rolled back toward him. The passenger window lowered only a few inches. "Sir," she called gently. "Are you okay?" The man looked up. Rainwater dripped from dark hair onto a face that seemed strangely calm despite the storm. His blue eyes met hers for only a second before drifting toward the empty highway behind her, scanning the darkness with practiced caution. "I think I'm turned around," he answered quietly. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being heard, yet tonight it sounded weighed down by fatigue. "Do you know where Willow Creek Road is?" Naomi frowned. "That's almost 15 miles from here." He gave the faintest nod. "I must have taken the wrong turn." She studied him for another moment. His clothes were expensive even beneath the rain, though now wrinkled and damp beyond recognition. There was no phone in his hands, no luggage, no sign of a vehicle anywhere nearby. Nothing about the situation made complete sense. "Do you have anyone I can call?" she asked. He hesitated long enough for silence to settle between them before quietly saying, "No." Naomi glanced at the empty road stretching in both directions. The nearest gas station had closed hours ago. The nearest neighborhood was miles away. Every instinct warned her to leave, yet another voice inside reminded her of something her late grandmother used to say whenever she hesitated to help someone. You never know which stranger is carrying tomorrow inside their pocket. Naomi unlocked the passenger door. "It's warm in here," she said softly. "I'll take you where you need to go." The man paused before opening the door. As he settled into the seat, rain dripping onto the floor mat, he stared forward through the windshield without speaking. After several quiet seconds, he finally broke the silence with words that sent an unexpected chill through the warm car. "If anyone asks," he said calmly, "you never saw me." Naomi kept both hands on the steering wheel as the windshield wipers pushed back another wave of heavy rain, their steady rhythm filling the silence between them. The stranger sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, his gaze fixed on the dark highway ahead as though he were watching something invisible beyond the reach of the headlights. She waited for him to explain the strange warning he had just given her, but he remained quiet. Finally, she offered a small smile that he probably could not even see in the dim light. "Well, I guess that makes introductions a little difficult." The corner of his mouth moved just enough to suggest the beginning of a smile before disappearing again. "Sometimes names create problems," he replied. Naomi laughed softly. "Mine never has. I am Naomi." He looked toward her for only a moment. "Thank you, Naomi." His voice carried genuine gratitude, and somehow that felt more unusual than everything else about him. They drove several miles without another word. Rain drummed against the roof, while passing pine trees faded into darkness one after another. Naomi reached toward the center console and picked up the unopened bottle of water she always kept for long shifts. "You should drink something," she said. "You look exhausted." He accepted it with a quiet nod. "You are very trusting." "Not really," she answered honestly. "I almost drove away." He raised an eyebrow. What changed your mind? Naomi shrugged. My grandmother used to tell me that if life gives you the chance to be kind, you should not assume someone else will do it instead. The stranger stared at the bottle in his hands for several seconds before unscrewing the cap. Your grandmother sounds wiser than most people I have met. Naomi smiled again. She usually was. The road curved gently toward a quieter neighborhood, where older homes sat beneath towering oak trees draped with Spanish moss. Streetlights reflected across puddles that shimmered like polished glass. The stranger suddenly leaned forward. Turn left at the next stop sign. Naomi followed his directions without questioning them. After another mile, he quietly said, That house. She slowed in front of a modest white farmhouse surrounded by a wooden fence. One porch light glowed warmly despite the late hour. It looked peaceful, almost forgotten by the rest of the world. She shifted the car into park. Are you sure this is the right place? She asked. He studied the house for a long moment before giving a single nod. Yes. Neither of them moved immediately. The rain had softened into a gentle whisper outside, making the silence inside the car feel even deeper. Then he reached into the inside pocket of his damp jacket. Naomi instinctively shook her head before he could remove whatever was inside. Please do not, she said. I did not stop because I wanted anything. He slowly withdrew his empty hand instead and looked at her with quiet curiosity. Most people would have expected something. Maybe, Naomi answered. But I already have enough. He glanced around the aging interior of her 12-year-old sedan, then toward the faded seat cover she had stitched together herself, and finally back at her. It was obvious that she did not have much at all, yet she believed what she had just said. For the first time that night, something softened behind his guarded eyes. He opened the passenger door and stepped into the cool night air. Before closing it, he leaned down slightly and spoke with calm sincerity. There are moments that seem ordinary until life decides they were not. Thank you for choosing this one. Naomi watched him walk through the gate without looking back. Seconds later, the porch light switched off. The house disappeared into darkness as though no one had ever been there. She took one last glance at the quiet property before starting the engine again, completely unaware that by sunrise every decision she had ever made about her simple life would begin to change. Naomi did not think about the stranger again until the alarm rang at 5:30 the next morning. By then the rain had disappeared, leaving the small town wrapped in cool air and golden sunlight that filtered through the kitchen window. She poured coffee into her favorite chipped mug while listening to her mother hum an old church hymn from the bedroom down the hall. It was a sound that always reminded Naomi why she kept working 2 jobs without complaint. Every paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Rent came first. Prescription medicine came second. Groceries came third if there was enough left. There was rarely anything beyond that, yet she refused to believe that hardship had the final word. She dressed in her neatly pressed housekeeping uniform, tied her natural curls into a simple bun, and smiled at her mother before leaving. Do not skip breakfast, her mother called after her. Naomi laughed. Only if you promise the same. Their tiny blue house sat near the edge of town, where neighbors still waved from front porches and children rode bicycles after school. It was not a wealthy neighborhood, but it carried something money could never purchase. People knew one another. They noticed when someone needed help. Naomi had learned long ago that kindness traveled farther than dollars ever could. Her first job waited 20 minutes away inside the sprawling Hawthorne estate, one of the largest private homes in northern Georgia. Marble floors reflected crystal chandeliers while polished wood carried the faint scent of cedar and expensive polish. Every room seemed designed to impress guests who never noticed the people quietly cleaning behind them. Naomi preferred it that way. She worked carefully, greeting the gardeners, thanking the kitchen staff, and helping new employees whenever they looked overwhelmed. Some wondered why she smiled so often despite carrying burdens no one else could see. The answer had always been simple. Bitterness demanded energy she could not afford to waste. Around noon, she found herself polishing a grand staircase overlooking the estate's enormous entrance hall. Outside, luxury vehicles came and went with practiced precision, each one disappearing behind tall iron gates. Naomi barely glanced toward them anymore. Wealth had become part of the background, something to clean around rather than admire. During her lunch break, she sat alone beneath an old oak tree behind the staff building, eating a turkey sandwich wrapped in wax paper. As she reached for her bottle of water, she noticed dried mud near the passenger side floor mat inside her aging sedan parked nearby. For a brief moment, she remembered the quiet stranger from the previous night. She wondered if he had made it safely inside that lonely farmhouse, or if he had family waiting for him after all. Then she smiled to herself and dismissed the thought. Some people entered your life only long enough to remind you who you wanted to remain. By late afternoon, Naomi finished her shift, collected her modest paycheck, and headed toward her second evening job at a neighborhood grocery store. She never noticed the black luxury sport utility vehicle parked across the street from the estate. Behind its dark, tinted windows, a man wearing an immaculate charcoal suit lowered a folder containing her employment records. He studied the single photograph clipped to the front page before quietly saying, "So this is Naomi Brooks." The driver glanced into the rearview mirror. "Should I arrange the meeting, sir?" The man looked through the windshield toward the road, where Naomi's old sedan disappeared into traffic. His expression remained calm, thoughtful, almost unreadable. "Not yet," he answered softly. "Some debts deserve to be repaid the right way." The grocery store closed a little after 9 that evening, and Naomi stepped into the warm summer air with tired feet and the quiet satisfaction that came from finishing another honest day of work. She waved goodbye to the cashier locking the front doors, climbed into her aging sedan, and drove home beneath a sky scattered with bright stars. The events of the previous night had already begun to fade into the rhythm of ordinary life. The mysterious stranger had become nothing more than an unusual memory tucked between long workdays and unpaid bills. By the time she reached her neighborhood, every porch light glowed softly against the darkness, and familiar houses stood peacefully beneath towering oak trees. She carried a small grocery bag inside, where her mother was already asleep in the recliner with a blanket folded across her lap and an unfinished crossword puzzle resting on her knees. Naomi smiled, gently covered her mother more comfortably, and quietly cleaned the dishes left in the sink before making herself a cup of chamomile tea. The clock on the microwave read 10:17 when the silence outside changed. At first it sounded like distant engines somewhere beyond the neighborhood, low and steady, growing louder with every passing second. Naomi walked toward the living room window and carefully moved the curtain aside. One pair of headlights appeared at the end of the street. Then another. Then another. Within moments, a procession of identical black sport utility vehicles rolled slowly into the neighborhood with perfect spacing, their polished exteriors reflecting the streetlights like moving mirrors. They did not speed. They did not make unnecessary noise. They simply arrived with quiet precision that somehow felt even more commanding. Porch lights flickered on one after another as curious neighbors stepped outside. Children peeked through windows while adults exchanged puzzled glances across front yards. Nobody in this quiet neighborhood had ever seen anything like it. Naomi felt her heartbeat quicken. The lead vehicle stopped directly in front of her small blue house. Every vehicle behind it came to a stop at exactly the same moment. Several men in tailored dark suits stepped out first, their movements calm, disciplined, and almost perfectly synchronized. They quietly looked around the street before opening the rear passenger door of the first vehicle. A polished leather shoe touched the pavement. Then the man from the rainy highway slowly emerged. Gone were the soaked clothes and weary expression of the previous evening. Tonight he wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and a dark tie that matched the elegance of the expensive watch resting beneath his cuff. His posture carried effortless authority, and every person around him seemed to adjust instinctively to his presence without a single word being spoken. Naomi stared through the window, hardly recognizing the quiet passenger she had driven less than 24 hours earlier. He looked toward her house with the same calm blue eyes she remembered, but now they carried unmistakable confidence instead of exhaustion. One of the suited men approached the front porch and gently knocked 3 times. The sound echoed through the silent street. Naomi opened the door slowly, uncertain whether she was still dreaming. The man stepped forward before anyone else could speak. A faint smile crossed his face, warmer than the one she had seen inside her car. "Good evening, Naomi," he said. "I believe I owe you an explanation." Before she could answer, she noticed every neighbor watching from their porches, their conversations reduced to whispers. The mysterious stranger she had offered a simple ride home no longer looked like someone searching for directions. He looked like someone the entire world moved aside for. And for the first time since meeting him, Naomi realized she knew absolutely nothing about the man standing on her doorstep. Naomi remained standing in the doorway for several long seconds, searching the man's face for the quiet stranger she had met on the rain-soaked highway. He looked exactly the same, yet everything about him felt different. The calm eyes were unchanged, but now they carried the confidence of someone accustomed to impossible decisions. The gentle voice remained, but everyone around him listened before he even spoke. Her mother slowly walked into the hallway, adjusting her sweater with a puzzled expression. "Naomi," she whispered, "is everything all right?" Naomi glanced back and nodded, although she was no longer certain herself. The man removed a pair of dark leather gloves and offered a respectful smile toward her mother before speaking again. "My name is Adrian Romano." The name settled into the night with unexpected weight. Several neighbors exchanged startled looks, and one older gentleman quietly lowered the newspaper he had been pretending to read from his porch. Even Naomi recognized the name. It appeared occasionally in business magazines displayed near grocery store checkout lines. Adrian Romano was known as an influential businessman whose investments stretched across hotels, shipping companies, restaurants, and charitable foundations. Rumors often surrounded people of extraordinary wealth, but Naomi had never paid much attention to headlines that felt far removed from her own life. To her, he had simply been a tired stranger needing a ride home. Adrian continued, his voice steady and sincere. "Yesterday evening I was traveling without my usual staff because I wanted a few hours alone. A series of unexpected circumstances left me stranded many miles from where I intended to be. Hundreds of cars passed me. No one stopped." His eyes met Naomi's again. "You did." Naomi shifted uncomfortably. "Anyone could have helped." Adrian slowly shook his head. "That is a comforting belief. Unfortunately, it is not always true." The quiet honesty in his words left no room for exaggeration. One of the men standing nearby stepped forward with a slim folder, but Adrian accepted it only to close it again without opening it. "My team wanted to show me your financial records, your employment history, and every detail of your life before I came here," he admitted. "Instead, I asked them only one question." Naomi looked at him curiously. "What question?" Adrian smiled faintly. "I asked whether the woman who offered a complete stranger a ride had asked for anything in return." Naomi folded her arms gently. "I did not think there was anything to ask for." "Exactly," Adrian replied. "That answer told me more about your character than any report ever could." The neighborhood remained completely silent. Even the usual chorus of crickets seemed distant beneath the stillness. Adrian took one careful step closer, making certain not to invade her space. "There is another reason I came personally." Naomi waited. "In my world," he said quietly, "people do favors because they expect influence, money, or protection. Yesterday, for the first time in many years, someone helped me without knowing who I was. You reminded me that kindness still exists when no one is watching." Naomi lowered her eyes, unsure how to respond to praise that felt entirely undeserved. She had simply followed the values her family had taught her since childhood. Adrian noticed her discomfort and gently changed the subject. "Tomorrow morning, if you are willing, I would like to invite you and your mother to breakfast. There is something important I would like to discuss, and I would rather do so across a table than on your front porch while your neighbors wonder what kind of trouble I have brought to this street." A few neighbors laughed softly, breaking the tension for the first time. Naomi looked toward her mother, who offered the smallest encouraging nod. She turned back to Adrian, still trying to understand how one ordinary decision made during a rainy drive home had somehow led the most powerful man she had ever met to stand patiently on her doorstep asking for nothing except the chance to say thank you. The following morning arrived with bright skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass through Naomi's neighborhood. She almost convinced herself that the previous night had been a dream until a sleek black sedan pulled quietly into her driveway exactly at 8:30. There was no unnecessary display, no line of vehicles, no gathering of suited men. Only one driver stepped out, opened the rear door with quiet professionalism, and smiled warmly. "Good morning, Miss Brooks. Mr. Romano is looking forward to having breakfast with you and your mother." Naomi exchanged a glance with her mother, Evelyn, who adjusted the collar of her light blue cardigan before giving an encouraging smile. "We should not keep him waiting," Evelyn said softly. During the drive, Naomi watched familiar neighborhoods slowly give way to tree-lined roads and rolling green hills. The destination was not a towering office building or an extravagant mansion as she had imagined. Instead, the sedan stopped beside a peaceful lakeside estate where sunlight danced across the water and white herons stood quietly along the shoreline. The atmosphere felt calm rather than intimidating. Adrian was already waiting on a wide stone terrace overlooking the lake, dressed in a simple navy sweater instead of the tailored suit he had worn the night before. Without hesitation, he walked forward and greeted Evelyn first, pulling out her chair before taking his own seat only after both women were comfortably settled. Naomi noticed the small gesture immediately. Power often revealed itself through grand displays, but character usually appeared in ordinary moments. Breakfast arrived on simple white dishes with fresh fruit, scrambled eggs, biscuits, and hot coffee. Adrian waited until everyone had been served before speaking. "Thank you both for accepting my invitation." Evelyn smiled kindly. "You have already thanked my daughter several times." Adrian nodded. "Perhaps. But gratitude is one of the few things that never loses value when repeated sincerely." Naomi looked across the table. "You said there was something important you wanted to discuss." Adrian rested his coffee cup on its saucer before answering. "There is." He reached beside his chair and placed a plain manila folder on the table. Naomi immediately raised one hand. "If that is money, I cannot accept it." Adrian looked at her for a moment before slowly sliding the unopened folder back toward himself. "I thought you might say that." Naomi smiled politely. "Then you already know my answer." "No," Adrian replied gently. "I only knew your answer to money. I did not know your answer to opportunity." Naomi tilted her head with quiet curiosity. Adrian continued. "Yesterday, I asked my staff to learn about your life. Not because I wished to invade your privacy, but because I wanted to understand the woman who helped a complete stranger without hesitation. They discovered something interesting. You work 2 jobs. You care for your mother. You have never missed a day of work in 3 years. Every supervisor described you with the same word." Naomi looked surprised. "What word?" Adrian smiled. "Dependable." Evelyn reached across the table and gently squeezed her daughter's hand, her eyes filled with quiet pride. Adrian leaned back in his chair and looked out across the shimmering lake before speaking again. "Successful businesses spend millions trying to find people with talent. I have learned that talent can be taught. Integrity cannot." He turned back toward Naomi. "That is why I am not here to repay a favor with money. I am here to offer you a choice." Naomi remained silent as the breeze rippled across the water between them. Adrian folded his hands calmly on the table. "If you are willing, I would like you to come work for my organization. Not as a maid, and not because you owe me anything. I want someone whose first instinct is kindness rather than ambition. Skills can grow with time. Character already has." Naomi looked down at her untouched coffee, realizing that the simple decision she had made on a rainy highway was leading her toward a future she had never imagined. Yet she also knew that accepting any offer from a man like Adrian Romano would change far more than her job title. Naomi drove home with Adrian's offer echoing through her mind long after the lakeside estate disappeared behind her. The road ahead looked exactly the same as it always had, lined with familiar gas stations, small churches, and family-owned diners, yet everything felt subtly different. Opportunity had arrived, wearing unexpected clothes, and she was not certain whether to welcome it or question it. Her mother broke the silence first. "You have been quiet for 20 minutes. Naomi smiled without taking her eyes off the road. "I keep wondering why someone like him would trust someone like me." Evelyn looked out the passenger window before answering. "Because he trusted you before he knew anything about you." The rest only confirmed what he already believed. Those words stayed with Naomi throughout the afternoon. She completed her grocery shift as she always did, stocking shelves, helping elderly customers carry bags to their cars, and greeting everyone with the same warm smile that had become part of her nature. She told no one about breakfast. She did not mention Adrian's offer. She wanted to think carefully before making a decision that could reshape both her life and her mother's future. Just before closing time, her phone vibrated with a message from an unfamiliar number. It contained only one sentence. "Take all the time you need. Good decisions should never be rushed." A second message followed a few moments later. If you have questions, I will answer them honestly. There was no signature, but she knew exactly who had sent it. Naomi slipped the phone back into her pocket, surprised that someone surrounded by wealth and influence would choose patience instead of pressure. The following morning, she returned to the Hawthorne estate for another housekeeping shift. At first, everything appeared completely normal. The marble floors still reflected the morning sunlight. Fresh flowers decorated the entrance hall. Staff members hurried through familiar routines. Yet within minutes, she sensed something unusual. Conversations became quieter whenever she walked into a room. Two employees who normally greeted her with cheerful smiles suddenly became awkwardly polite. During her lunch break, one of the newer housekeepers finally approached her with hesitant curiosity. "Naomi, can I ask you something?" Naomi nodded. "Of course." The young woman lowered her voice. "Is it true that a convoy of luxury vehicles came to your neighborhood 2 nights ago?" Naomi looked surprised. "How did you hear about that?" "Someone's cousin lives on your street," she replied. "By yesterday afternoon, half the county was talking about it." Naomi laughed softly, hoping to dismiss the growing rumors. "It was just someone thanking me for helping him." The young woman stared at her with wide eyes. "People are saying it was Adrian Romano." Naomi did not answer immediately. Her silence was enough. Within seconds, the young housekeeper covered her mouth in amazement. "I cannot believe it." Before Naomi could explain further, the estate manager appeared in the hallway and politely asked if he could speak with her in private. Inside his office, he closed the door and folded his hands across his desk. "Naomi," he said with a reassuring smile, "I have received 3 separate phone calls this morning from people asking whether you still work here." Naomi felt her heartbeat quicken. Who was calling? The manager shook his head. No names were given. They were respectful, but they all asked the same question. He paused before continuing. "I have worked in hospitality for 30 years, and I have learned that when important people begin asking about an employee, life is usually about to change." Naomi left the office carrying more questions than answers. She still had not decided whether to accept Adrian's invitation, but she could already feel that the quiet, predictable life she had always known was slowly giving way to something far larger than she had ever expected. That evening, Naomi sat alone on the small wooden porch outside her home, watching the last colors of sunset fade behind the quiet neighborhood. A gentle breeze rustled the maple trees while children laughed somewhere down the street, their voices blending with the distant sound of sprinklers watering freshly cut lawns. Her mother's words, Adrian's unexpected offer, and the growing curiosity surrounding her life all circled through her thoughts. She had always believed that peace came from living simply, yet now simplicity itself seemed to be asking her to make the most complicated decision she had ever faced. Just before dusk, her phone rang again. This time, Adrian's name appeared on the screen. "Naomi," answered after a brief hesitation. "Good evening." His familiar calm voice came through immediately. "I hope I am not interrupting dinner." She smiled. "You are not." "Have you reached a decision?" he asked gently. Naomi looked toward the glowing windows of her small home before answering honestly. "Not yet." There was no disappointment in his response. "I expected that. A decision that changes your future deserves patience." Naomi appreciated that he never tried to persuade her. Instead, he simply listened as she explained her concerns. "I have spent my entire adult life taking care of my mother. I know exactly where I belong. If I accept your offer, everything becomes uncertain." Adrian remained silent for a thoughtful moment before speaking again. "May I tell you something my father once taught me?" "Of course." He believed that fear and wisdom often sound exactly alike. The difficult part is learning which one is speaking. Naomi considered those words carefully. "How do you tell the difference?" Adrian answered without hesitation. "Wisdom asks whether your values will remain the same. Fear asks whether your circumstances might change. One protects your character. The other protects your comfort." Naomi looked across the quiet street as porch lights flickered on one by one. She realized she was not afraid of hard work. She had lived with that her entire life. What unsettled her was stepping into a world she did not understand. Adrian seemed to sense her hesitation even through the silence. "Naomi, I am not asking you to become someone different. If accepting my offer requires you to abandon the woman who stopped for a stranger on a rainy night, then I have made the wrong offer." Those words settled gently in her heart. Before she could respond, another voice interrupted the call. It was the familiar estate manager from the Hawthorne residence. Miss Brooks, he called from the sidewalk. Naomi looked up in surprise. The manager walked toward her carrying a neatly sealed envelope. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but this was delivered to the estate for you this afternoon. Naomi thanked him and accepted the envelope. After he left, she opened it. Carefully, inside was a handwritten letter from the owner of the Hawthorne estate. The elegant script was brief but heartfelt. It thanked Naomi for her years of loyal service and informed her that several employees had quietly recommended her for promotion many times because of her honesty, reliability, and compassion toward both guests and coworkers. At the bottom was one final sentence that made her pause. Sometimes the world notices goodness long before goodness notices itself. Naomi lowered the letter and looked toward the darkening sky. Adrian was still waiting quietly on the phone. Are you still there? He asked. Naomi smiled, feeling something inside her shift with unexpected clarity. Yes, she answered softly. And for the first time, I think I understand what you were really offering. It was never just a job. It was the chance to carry the same values into a bigger world. On the other end of the line, Adrian allowed himself a quiet smile, knowing that the answer he had been waiting for was now closer than ever, not because he had convinced her, but because she had discovered it for herself. The next morning the sun rose over the lake with a quiet brilliance that seemed to erase every trace of uncertainty from the day before. Naomi stood at the entrance of Adrian Romano's headquarters, not wearing an expensive suit or carrying the confidence of someone entering a powerful organization. She wore the same quiet dignity she had carried through every ordinary day of her life. As the elevator doors opened, Adrian was already waiting in the lobby instead of asking someone else to greet her. Good morning, Naomi, he said with an easy smile. Welcome. She looked around at the polished marble floors, the walls covered with photographs of hospitals, schools, and community centers funded through the company's charitable foundation. The place felt less like a fortress of wealth and more like a reminder that influence could build as well as impress. Adrian noticed her curiosity. People spend a great deal of time talking about success, he said as they walked together. Very few spend enough time talking about responsibility. Throughout the morning, he introduced her to department leaders, administrative staff, and longtime employees. To Naomi's surprise, he never introduced her as the woman who had helped him on a rainy night. Instead, he simply said, "This is Naomi Brooks. She is joining us because character is one qualification that cannot be taught." Those words stayed with everyone who heard them. During lunch, they sat once again across a simple table overlooking the same peaceful lake. Naomi finally asked the question that had remained in her heart since the beginning. Why did you trust me so quickly? Adrian rested his coffee cup on the table before answering. Because on the night we met, you believed I was an ordinary stranger with nothing to offer you. The decision you made in that moment was the most honest introduction anyone has ever given me. Naomi smiled softly. I only gave someone a ride home. Adrian slowly shook his head. No, you reminded me that kindness still exists without applause, without cameras, and without expectations. Money can purchase loyalty. Power can command obedience. Neither can earn genuine compassion. The quiet sincerity in his voice carried more weight than any public speech ever could. Several weeks passed, and Naomi settled into her new role with the same humility that had defined every chapter of her life. She treated executives with the same respect she showed receptionists. She learned every responsibility with patience, listened more than she spoke, and never forgot the people whose work often went unnoticed. Before long, employees discovered that the culture of the organization itself had begun to change. Managers greeted maintenance workers by name. Team meetings became more collaborative. Volunteer projects expanded into neighborhoods that had long been overlooked. None of those changes happened because of a new policy. They happened because one person's quiet example reminded others of the values they had forgotten. One afternoon, as Naomi prepared to leave for home, Adrian met her near the front entrance. Do you ever regret stopping that night? He asked. She looked toward the parking lot where her dependable old sedan was still waiting, unchanged despite everything else that had changed around it. A warm smile crossed her face. Not for a single second. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. Neither do I. Naomi drove home beneath a golden sunset, passing the same highway where their paths had first crossed. The road looked ordinary, just as it always had. Yet she understood something now that she had not understood before. Extraordinary moments rarely announced themselves when they arrived. They often disguised themselves as simple choices, asking only whether someone was willing to care. And on one quiet rainy night, a woman with very little had given a stranger something that even the most powerful man in the city could never have purchased. In return, he did not simply change her future. Together they reminded everyone around them that true greatness begins the moment kindness asks for nothing in return.